On April 9, 1940, we were absolutely horrified. The first thing I remember was the day before, somebody brought a radio out on the steps in front of the house, and we all congregated around and heard that German ships were on their way, and it was obvious that they were going to Norway, but we still didn't want to believe it. We were very much supportive of the fact that the king went to Norway, to England, and operated as much as he could from there. The day the war broke out, everybody was trying to figure out where do we go. And we ended up going to some very distant relatives who lived on a farm. It was remote in those days, now it's not remote, but the roads were bad in those days. Very few people had cars. Gasoline was not available. And so we ended up going there as evacuees. A lot of people were in what you call the underground, where they disappeared and they ended up living up in the mountains in these remote cottages. And some of them, of course, had escaped to England, learned how to be saboteurs, and were parachuted back into Norway. First of all, you weren't allowed to travel.
Okay.
And if you were an adult, you had to have a big piece of paper called Grenseboerbewijs. It said what your name was and where you lived, and whenever the Germans wanted to stop you, they could just ask for it. And to see that you weren't from somewhere else, you see. You were not allowed to leave Mandal. If you lived in Mandal, you were not allowed to leave Mandal, okay? But of course, people who were engaged in underground activity might move from one place to the other. So this is how the German caught some of the underground people. Just a small percentage of Norwegians were Nazi sympathizers. Because there were a lot of people at the time throughout Europe who were more afraid of communism than they were afraid of Nazism. And so there was a small percentage in each country that sympathized with the Germans and actually went to fight with the Germans when Germany attacked Russia. And, as it turned out, there were about 3 or 4 families that were Jewish, but they never acted as Jews. After the war, the 3 or 4 of them who lived in Mandal had been arrested, and I don't even know if they survived. But the thing is, the Germans didn't tell us anything. There were no newspapers, nothing. And radios weren't allowed. If you hit a radio and you got caught, you got sent to concentration camp or you were executed. So we heard nothing on the radio because we didn't have any radio. And the newspaper, the only newspaper in Mandal, was completely controlled by the Germans. The news was just absolutely ridiculous because it was controlled completely by the Germans, and it were all lies basically. So we knew very, very little, very little. The people who knew didn't want to tell anybody because the danger of telling somebody, if you did know something, would get you sent to concentration camp. The Germans who were stationed in Norway realized how lucky they were, because if they hadn't been sent to Norway to occupy Norway, they would have been sent to the Russian front.
And be fighting.
And be fighting. It was not the German soldiers that did bad, it was the Gestapo.
Yes.
It was the Gestapo who was bad. and they came into our house once. And you've seen the movies where a guy in black outfit with a big swastika.
Yeah.
They charged through the front door, and they were looking for my cousin. Lived in the same house. They thought he had been engaged in some underground activity, so they said, where's his bedroom? And so they walked into his bedroom and opened the drawers, and in a night table that he had, they found a little bullet like this, a 9mm bullet. He had probably found it somewhere, because let's face it was war.
Yeah.
And they went bloody ballistic, and they arrested him. Some people that I knew died. In fact, I knew one very, very well, and it was very, very tragic. He was part of the underground, was arrested. He was a student at the University of Oslo at the time, and he was arrested and sent to German concentration camp in Germany.
Okay.
And died on the way back from the war zone. In 1944, the English and the Americans and many of the French who had escaped to England, landed in Normandy.
This is Robert St. John in the NBC newsroom in New York. Ladies and gentlemen, we may be approaching a fateful hour. All night long, bulletins have been pouring in from Berlin claiming that D-Day is here, claiming that the invasion of Western Europe has begun.
But the moment the war was over, the Germans were afraid that the Norwegians would attack them, and therefore they laid down their arms right away. They banned a lot of things, and we, young boys, I was 14 years old at the time, we knew how to steal a few things from the Germans. The Germans built barracks,
Yeah.
and then of course they abandoned them. And so we went and we stole whole sections of these buildings, and we built a cottage near where my friend lived, which was not very far from where I lived. And we used to have dances in the area.